Okay, we're moving on to the concepts now in introducing theology. Is what does it mean that Christianity is a worldview? Okay, how is Christianity, as we're defining it, distinct as a way of thinking, a way of approaching the world, and distinct from others? So this is why on roughly page 7 of the Prolegomena syllabus, you're going to find a topic, worldview and theological method. And this is for the purpose of how should we think as Christians in identifying who we are in relationship to other religions, other ways of thinking about God's salvation, human being, ethics, and all those other important categories. So probably the first thing we need to do is just ask and answer the question, what is a worldview? And the definition I have here is pretty simple. It's an overall perspective on life that sums up what we know about the world. So, simply speaking, a worldview is a set of beliefs about the most important issues of life. And if we get this stuff, we say it's a, quote, conceptual scheme by which we consciously or unconsciously place or fit everything we believe. And the important thing here, by which we interpret and judge reality. Okay? So remember, our goal here ultimately is know the truth that sets us free. So we want to make sure that our perspective has a one-to-one correspondence with a mind-independent reality. So this is why when we look at worldview thinking, whatever we have as these 5 basic presumptions are the most important ones. They're going to govern everything that we understand and experience. So this is why we better get this right, and we understand that false views of Christianity will have even a different worldview. Other religions have a different worldview, where we start dividing up the elements of a worldview. The different people divide it up, sometimes 5, 6, 7, or 8. I have 5 basic elements of a worldview, which some of them will have some subcategories. But the first one is God. Who is God in a worldview? Next, you're going to look at what's ultimate reality in a worldview, what exists, okay? And then third, what is knowledge in a worldview? What counts for knowledge in a particular worldview, and what's its grounding? Then we look at, again, the big questions. What's morality in a worldview? How do you know right and wrong? And then ultimately, we look at what is a human being in this particular worldview. And those are the 5 basic issues that really define and govern everything that we believe and do. So to begin with, we look at the concept of God in a worldview. And I mentioned in my outline here that, I actually have a book at home. It's the Encyclopedia of Gods, okay? And literally the book has about 2,500 names of the various gods in the world. And what we're really looking at is what do people consider ultimate for them? And that's really what we're asking is who or what is ultimate in the worldview. So now what's important here is there really aren't 2,500 conceptions of God. There's really only about maybe 8 to 10. You start thinking about what's pantheism, polytheism, monotheism, dualism, atheism, and so forth. Like I said, there really aren't that many different conceptions of God, but you have a whole lot of nuance in the names and the applications in culture. And that's why for your apologetic, remember, don't get overwhelmed. You really are going to have to learn about 6 or 7 different worldviews, not 2,500 worldviews, to be able to answer the questions. And so for this, the answer is what's ultimate. And so, for example, and we'll look at that question, for a Christian, what's ultimate for us is the true and living creator, triune God, okay? That's what's ultimate for us. We might even understand this, what we call perfect being theology, or a maximally great being. As the fact is, God is the ultimate being that can even possibly exist and does exist, okay? And not only is God personal, but God is eternally one eternal being who is simultaneously 3 persons in a righteous love relationship. So, by the way, which distinguishes it from all other forms of monotheism. All other forms of monotheism are one-person monotheism, where God in eternity is by himself, all alone, with his spiritual hand on his chin, thinking very important thoughts, okay? Now, the Trinitarian God does that as well, but they're also giving eternal hugs to each other and having a time of joy and fellowship, as well as having good, important thoughts. So this is why we think about the concept of love and fellowship. What we call Unitarian monotheists don't really, their ultimate is individualism. Their ultimate is being the smartest person, or to stand out and to be individual, where this is why for Christian monotheism, the ultimate is this: by this all people will know that you're my disciples or imitators of me, that you have love for one another. And that is the difference between imitating the Trinitarian God and the Unitarian God, as being in the image of God with respect to being in the ontological image. So again, what's ultimate for us is the triune God, and is the basis for this is who we follow and this is who we attempt to imitate in every limited way that we can. Now, when you think about what's ultimate in a worldview of pantheism, pantheism is a view that everything is divine, but also what's important is that pantheism includes the concept of monism, that everything is one thing. Everything's divine and everything is one thing. One substance exists and it's all infinite divine substance, which means what? You are infinite divine substance. You just forgot you were infinite divine substance, so you need to chant, do X, Y, Z to remember you were infinite divine substance, which leads to all sorts of problems, which is, how did God forget he or she was God? Okay, how are you, if you forgot you were God and you're independent of it, how is it there's only one thing? Why are you worshiping some sort of deity in a temple or a statue when there's really a second thing and not only one thing? So again, we'll get into that when we get into what we call deficient views of God, when we get into the doctrine of God. But so see, that's what would be ultimate in pantheism, is realizing that you are God, okay? What's called self-realization. In atheism, or more particularly atheistic physicalism, okay? Because true atheism is a positive assertion of the non-existence of any deity, particularly a designer and creator of the known universe. Okay, that's the important thing. But also atheism goes with with physicalism. The only things that exist are physical things, things that have what we would call a circumscriptive presence, a corporeal presence. There are no spirits, so to speak, or eternal spirits in a physicalist atheistic worldview. But particularly for the universe is that we think about it, they would see the entire world or universe as teleological or non-purposeful. There is no design or purpose to the universe. And that's why we'll get to category number 2, is that, see, once you get to what's ultimate, the next question is what we call ultimate reality. What exists in this worldview? See, and this is going to be important for what are humans, what are ethics. See, what is it you ought to be doing because of what's ultimate and what exists? See, it logically flows from that. So we think about, let's start with atheistic physicalism. Atheistic physicalism, when they answer the question of what exists, it's at this point, whatever contemporary science says, it's protons, neutrons, electrons, quarks, wavicles, whatever subatomic physical stuff is, it's non-designed, unintentional, very important, teleological or non-purposeful matter that accidentally and chaotically clump together, okay? That's what ultimate reality is. Everything that exists, because there aren't spirits, everything is physical. It's accidentally, chaotically clumped together matter. So a human person, a tree, a rock, you name it, that's just a different way, different, not good, better, or best. It's a different way that all the physical stuff accidentally and non-purposefully clumped together. So that's why it's significant that, in doing apologetics, and I've done talks on, how to talk to atheists and witness to atheists. But the important thing to do in evangelism is to get people to their what is ultimate, but what is ultimate reality? What exists? Because we don't want to let non-Christian worldviews borrow from a Christian worldview to support their worldview. For example, many atheists use words like ought and should, okay? But what does that mean? Well, the idea that there's such a thing as normative ethics, a way something ought to be. Well, how do you get an ought from an is? See, the universe is just one big is. It just exists. There's no design. There's no transcendent being which is complete or perfect and maximally great to be the measure of all things. So there really is no hierarchy of good, better, best, or on the other end, you get to worst. There only is. So this is important that, again, if an atheist makes a statement that, well, you Christians shouldn't do this, you shouldn't cram your religion down our throat. First question is, I don't even understand what you mean by should or ought there, okay? Because all I know is to see you have a hole under your nose and I have a hole under my nose, and that what you've got are a bunch of particles that are somehow in hard determinism making noises come out from under my nose. Okay, I don't know how that has meaning, why it's normative, that it ought to be some way. Can you explain that or ground that in some foundation? See, and this is why it's actually pretty easy to destroy atheism as a system, because they constantly have to borrow from monotheism to justify meaning and language. The fact is, you see, what's personhood? Why is one opinion true or false or greater or better than another? See, that assumes there's personhood, that there's free will, that there's praise and blame, that there's a way to measure this and a hierarchy of it, okay? And again, that can't be done in an atheistic physicalist worldview with respect to ontology or what exists, if all you've got is chaotically clumped together stardust particles, okay? So that's why worldview thinking is going to be very important, not only for our own worldview, but for the apologetic task. And then just to compare that to another worldview, think about pantheism. And we can talk about polytheism or dualism or some of the other ones later on when we get to false views of God when we get to the doctrine of God. But think about pantheism, what I mentioned earlier. If everything is divine, okay, then the only thing that exists is what? Divine substance. One thing exists, infinite divine substance. So again, like with the atheistic physicalists, in one sense, there is only an is and no ought in pantheism. Because if everything is divine, then as you'll see, for example, in Hinduism, you've got, well, what about evil? The doctrine of Maya or illusion. It doesn't exist. It's not real, okay? Oh, okay, it's not real. Then why is it that virtually every Hindu, every New Ager who believes in pantheism has a set of keys, locks their doors, go to court? The fact is, you constantly acknowledge the existence of evil, but pretend it doesn't exist. What do you have to do that? Again, borrow from a Christian monotheistic worldview to do all those things. But what's significant, which I'll cover in the next segment, is that your behaviors follow from your view of what's ultimate and what ultimately exists, your ontology. So next what we're going to do is look at how that gets applied and how it affects humanness, ethics, how we treat people, how we treat God's creation, the culture. Because if you err on the first two, you're going to get it wrong on the last three in its application. So we'll do that next. Thanks.